Hi and welcome to the ninth video in this series. In this video, we're going to take a look at working with the basics of CSS, where we'll be treating height, width, border and border radius, color, background image, and types of CSS color values. So let's get right into it. As we can tell from the previous videos that working with CSS is all about changing the properties of elements. First of all, let's give an element to work on, and then we are going to identify this element uniquely by an ID, say my first div, so first div this way. Then we are going to give this a content of I am the first div. So now in the style sheet document, we're just going to select the division first div and begin to change the CSS properties. The first of which will be height, and then the height I want us to give it 40 pixels. Now what is about this pixels? Pixel is just a way of measuring values. Just like how we have centimeters and inches and all that, pixels is just a way of measuring values when working with CSS. We have other types of measurements like percentages and EM, which you can take a look at really if you want to learn more about measurements in CSS. But for the purpose of this course, we are just going to use percentages and pixels. So now that we've changed the height of the element, let's go ahead and see how it looks like in the browser. As we can see, even though the height of the element has changed, it is not about the height of the text but the element itself. Okay, I mean the rectangular box. So we can't really visually see that. That is because we do not have any background image or background color. So let's go ahead and give it some sort of background. I'm just going to set the background to say green. Then we head back and refresh this. And as we can see that we now have a background to this whole thing. So the next thing I want us to do is to actually change the height property and see that it is really working in effect. 140 pixels, refresh the browser, and we see that we have a higher banner, or we have a higher division. The next thing I want us to talk about is the width of the division or the element. Now the width is the span, how far it goes across the page, and that is the width. To change the width, we just have to give it the value that we want. After we have selected the width property, then we give it the value. So I'm just going to set this to 50%. Since I talked about percentages, let's just set this to 50% of the entire page and see what happens. Refresh, and we have 50% of the entire page, given that the page already, or the HTML element, has some sort of margin around it, okay, which we are going to reset by the help of something we call a reset style sheet. We'll talk about that later in the course. Now the next thing I want us to talk about is the border. Okay, the border is actually a line that we see at the edge or after the content of the document or the element itself. So the border, I want to set this to 1 pixel in size. Then I want it to be solid in nature, and then I'm going to give it a color, say red. So as we can see, we now have a red thin border here, but we can equally change the size of the border, maybe say to 10 pixels, and then perform a refresh and see what happens. Okay, so now we have a bigger border. What I want to do is to invert the colors. So I'm going to change this to pink, and then I'll change the border to green instead, so that we can have a more visually pleasing object on the page. Head back and perform a refresh, and I think this looks better. Okay, now we can equally change the look of the edge right here, or the corners. We can change the look of the corners by the border radius property, and then we're just going to set this thing to 5 pixels. So as we can see that this now has a more rounded corner, which looks beautiful compared to what we had first. But one thing we have to know about borders is that now when you decide to add a border to your element, the height and the width of your element changes. So if this had a 40 pixel height and maybe a 50 pixel height in the beginning, After giving this a 10 pixel border, it's going to increase the height and the width by 10 each. So if the height was 40, it becomes 50, and if the width was 50, it becomes 60. By the way, we can use CSS to turn that off, but we are not going to use that in this course. Now, the next property is the color property, where we get to change the color of the text itself. And then we are just going to set the color of this very text to yellow. Okay. And we perform a refresh, and we can see that the color of the text itself has changed to yellow. Now, I want us to look at changing the font weight, where we can tell if we wanted the font to be thin or either bold. Okay, I'm just going to set this to bold, and then upon refresh, I'm expecting to see a text that looks bolder, okay, bigger, right? Okay, that has taken effect. Next, we can also change the font size to say 20 pixel, and then this looks bigger now. Now, as we can see with the color values that we are using here, there are different types of CSS colors. We can use the very common color names like say green, pink, yellow, red, and have it change the color. Also, we can use hexadecimal numbers, say E3 or E33, and then let's go ahead and refresh and see what happens. Okay, well, you can see that the border has changed to red, so E33 in essence is color red. But then you need to begin with a hashtag, or we can equally use an RGB color value, just like so. Now the RGB color value specifies the red, green, and then the black color, right? So if we set this thing to value, say 23, 54, and say 22, what we are doing is we are mixing colors. We are mixing red, green, and black to give us some sort of unique color. Let's see what that gives us. Oh, that is pretty nice color, right? So the next thing that I want us to do is just to append an A or an alpha channel to this. Now, if we appended an alpha channel, what we can do is that we can change the transparency or the opacity of the color, how well we want this to show on the page. So we can make it a little bit transparent. This has a value ranging from 0 to 1. 0 meaning zero transparency or opacity. You don't want it to be opaque at all. You don't want to see anything. So let's just give 0 and see what happens. See, we cannot actually see it even though it is there. So let's change this thing to point, say 5, right? Halfway the transparency, and see that the border looks a lot thinner. Guys, this is the real trick about changing or the glass feel that we are going to get with the footer that we have, right here. Okay, and as we can see too, that the footer renders very well in different browsers, even though there are lots and lots of browser inconsistencies. This is Google Chrome, and then we can equally open this in Mozilla Firefox by just copying the web address and then bringing it here, paste and go, and then we have it here, equally working perfectly, right? But as we can see from here, we have something like an image, right? This is a background image. So how do we include a background image in our document? First of all, we get back to our code, and then we specify that we want to change the background image dash image, just like so. And then we write the URL or the location where the background image can be found. This is normally a string value. So we have to find a background picture and then give it the directory name for us to find the background. And since this is our project directory, or we're working with the project files, I'm just going to create a folder called images. So now that we have a folder called images, we can go ahead and include a file in this image directory. I'm just going to look for a file and then put it in this folder. And then as we can see, now we have a background picture, or a picture that we will be using for the entire project. So now the next thing is to find the directory where it can be found. As we can see, we are working in the CSS folder as of now, or the style sheets file. So we have to first move back once and enter the images folder where we can find the image file. So we're just going to move back once, then we enter the images folder where we can find the file called bg dot, and it's a JPEG file that we are using. So let's go ahead and refresh the browser or open this right in our browser and see what happens. So we can see that we have just included a background image to the HTML element right here. So guys, given that we've studied height, background, width, border radius, color, font weight, font size, background image, we would meet in the next video where we're going to go more into more advanced topics in CSS. Thank you very much.